The first time Elvis Presley saw the bear, he was just a kid, maybe 10 or 11, standing in the middle of a dirt road in Tupelo, Mississippi. The bear was big, almost as tall as a man, and it was coming straight at him. His heart pounded in his chest, and his palms were sweaty. He didn't know what to do, run, freeze. But before he could decide, his mother, Gladys, appeared out of nowhere, grabbing his hand and pulling him back toward their tiny two-room house. "Well, the bear shall be gentle," she said, her voice steady, as if the bear was just a friendly neighbor stopping by for a chat. Elvis never forgot that moment. It was as if his mother's words had a magic power, making the bear seem less scary, less dangerous. But the fear stayed with him, a small, nagging feeling that no matter how hard he tried, he might never be safe. Growing up in the Mississippi Delta during the Great Depression was tough. Elvis's family was poor, really poor. His father, Vernon, worked odd jobs when he could find them, but there were long stretches of time when there was no money for food or clothes. They lived in a small, rickety house with a dirt floor, and sometimes the only heat they had was from a wood stove that smoked and sputtered. Elvis and his twin brother, Jesse Guerin, were born on January 8, 1935, but Jesse died at birth. From the very beginning, Elvis felt like he was carrying a weight, a sense that he had to leave for both of them. His mother doted on him, and he adored her. She was his protector, the one who made everything seem okay, even when it wasn't. As a child, Elvis was quiet and shy. He didn't have many friends, and he often felt out of place at school. The other kids teased him for being poor, for wearing hand-me-down clothes, for not having a father who was around all the time. But music was his escape. He loved to sing, and he would often hum or whistle tunes to himself as he walked to school, or helped his father with chores. One day, when he was about 12, Elvis saw a guitar in a shop window. It was a used one, not very expensive, but it was beautiful to him. He begged his father to buy it, and after a lot of convincing, Vernon finally gave in. That guitar became Elvis's best friend. He would sit on the front porch, strumming and singing, losing himself in the melodies. He learned to play by ear, picking out tunes he heard on the radio or in church. Music was his way of feeling less alone, less scared. It was the only thing that made him feel like he could be someone else, someone better. But the world outside was still harsh, and the bear was always out there, waiting for its moment. Elvis's life was about to change, but he didn't know it yet. He was just a boy with a guitar, trying to find his way in a world that seemed to have no room for him. But the bear was always there, and the world was about to get a lot more complicated. Elvis's childhood was a mix of hard times and moments of joy. His birth in a tiny, two-room shack in Tupelo, Mississippi, was marked by both hope and tragedy. His twin brother, Jesse, was stillborn, and the loss left a deep impression on Elvis. As he grew, he often wondered why Jesse had died and not him, leading to a belief that he was meant to be special, a notion his mother, Gladys, encouraged. Tupelo was a small, poor town, and the Presleys were among the many families struggling to make ends meet. The house Elvis was born in had no electricity or running water, and the family had to rely on a log stove for heat and a communal pump for water. Despite the hardships, Gladys found pride in their little home, and she and Vernon would share their dreams for the future, often while sitting on their porch on warm summer evenings. Gladys worked at the Tupelo Garment Center, earning just $2 a day, while Vernon took any job he could find. The Great Depression made life even harder, and the family's financial struggles were compounded when Vernon was sent to Parchman State Penitentiary for altering a check. For the next 9 months, Gladys and Elvis had to rely on welfare and the kindness of relatives. They moved frequently, living with different family members until Vernon was released early due to a petition from neighbors and friends. Elvis's early years were marked by a strong sense of family. He and his parents slept in the same room, and when Vernon was away, Elvis would sleep with his mother. They developed a special bond, with Elvis calling her Satnin, and the two of them often talking in their own baby language. Gladys would read Bible stories to him, and he would later remember these tales fondly, especially the stories of Jonah and Joshua. Music was a constant presence in the Presley household. Both Gladys and Vernon had good voices, and they would sing hymns together, with Elvis joining in. Church was a central part of their lives, and Elvis would often try to sing with the choir, even when he was just a toddler. He was deeply influenced by the emotional and physical expressions of the preachers and the congregation, which he would later incorporate into his own performances. Gladys was a loving but protective mother. She was always worried about losing Elvis, having already lost one child and suffered a miscarriage. She would spank him if he did anything to worry her, like falling into the creek while playing. Despite her fears, she encouraged Elvis to believe in his specialness, telling him that his survival from a severe case of tonsillitis was a message from God. Elvis's childhood was a blend of poverty, love, and faith. He grew up believing that he was meant for something greater, a belief that would shape his future and drive him to become the king of rock and roll. But the seeds of his struggles were also sown in those early years, with the family's financial hardships and the impact of his father's incarceration leaving lasting marks on his life. Elvis grew up with a mix of love and strictness. His mother, Gladys, doted on him so much that sometimes it seemed like she might spoil him. She made sure he always had his own plate, cup, knife, fork, and spoon, even when he went to school. Other kids found it funny, but for Elvis it was a big deal. He couldn't stand it if anyone else used his things, and he would get really angry if they did. He didn't know why it bothered him so much, but it did. This tendency to get mad over small things stayed with him his whole life, especially with the people he was closest to. As the old song went, "You always hurt the one you love," and Elvis realized he sometimes hurt his mother, though he never meant to. Despite his occasional outbursts, Elvis was generally a quiet, polite, and dutiful son. His biggest worries were his bad dreams and sleepwalking. His mother would often find him wandering around at night, thinking he was looking for someone named Jesse. She would gently lead him back to bed, and he would calm down. Elvis always promised his mother he would take care of her when he grew up. "Don't you worry none, Mama. When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a fine house and pay everything you owe at the grocery store, and buy 2 Cadillacs, one for you and Daddy and one for me," he would say. His parents didn't have much education, but they were determined that Elvis would do better. They wanted him to graduate from high school and get a good job. Elvis's first school was East Tupelo Consolidated, a tiny place with 2 grades in one room. At first, Gladys walked him to school every day, but later, he went with the other kids from the neighborhood. School was strict, and Elvis was shy. He was polite and respectful, always saying "yes, ma'am," and "no, ma'am." But he didn't say much else in class. When he saw old school photos of himself, a skinny little kid in overalls, he wondered what kind of future he might have imagined back then. During World War II, Elvis and his classmates would sing "God Bless America." One day, when he was 7, he sang a duet with a little girl named Shirley. They sang "You Are My Sunshine," and Elvis pretended to play on a toy guitar. He often imagined himself performing on the Grand Ole Opry, a radio show his family and everyone else in town listened to on Saturday nights. The Opry was a big deal, and sometimes his dad had to attach a radio to the car battery to hear it. One of Elvis's favorite songs was "Old Shep," an old country song about a boy and his dog. Elvis had a dog named Rex, but Rex got sick and had to be put down. The song resonated with him, and he sang it at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show when he was 10. He stood on a chair to reach the microphone, wearing pressed denims, an unfastened tie, and wire glasses. He came 5th in the competition, and some people said he was 2nd, but he got free rides at the fair. However, his mother gave him a whipping that day, and he felt like she didn't love him. For his 11th birthday, Elvis got a guitar. His parents couldn't afford a bicycle, and his mother was worried about him getting hit by a car. He also wanted a hunting rifle but told his dad he didn't want to shoot birds. The guitar was his mother's idea. "You could play it when you sing, Elvis," she said. He learned to play from a music book and some tips from the church pastor. Soon he was teaching himself, and music became a big part of his life. Elvis loved going to the local radio station to watch the Saturday Jamboree, an amateur show held in the old court building. He would sing "Old Shep," and sometimes play his guitar. One of the performers, Mississippi Slim, even backed him on his guitar. Living in Tupelo, Elvis was exposed to different kinds of music, especially from the Chacarag area, where many African-American families lived. He started listening to rhythm and blues on the radio. even though his parents didn't approve. When Elvis was 12, the family moved to a rented house near the Chacarag area. He started attending Milan Junior High, where he felt self-conscious about being the only kid in class still wearing overalls. His parents could only afford that, and years later, he refused to wear jeans because they reminded him of his difficult childhood. He loved comic books and movies, especially the Saturday serials starring Roy Rogers and Gene Autry. Elvis was always thinking about how he could help his family. One day, when he heard his parents worrying about money, he promised his mother he would buy her a fine house and 2 Cadillacs when he grew up. His father laughed and said, "Just so long as you don't steal one, son." Money problems continued, and when Elvis was 13, his father got fired from his job for bootlegging moonshine. The family decided to move to Memphis, 100 miles away. They sold their furniture, packed what they could carry, and set off in their old car. Memphis seemed like a big, exciting city, and Elvis felt a sense of adventure as they arrived. He left behind his childhood in Tupelo, but Memphis was where his dreams would begin. The Presleys' early days in Memphis were tough. They started in boarding houses, where they shared a tiny room for cooking, sleeping, and eating, and had to use a shared bathroom. But things got better when Vernon found a job at United Paint Company, and Gladys went back to work as a sewing machine operator. When Travis and Lorraine, Gladys's brother and sister-in-law, joined them, Memphis started to feel more like home. A few months later, the Memphis Housing Authority gave them an apartment in Lauderdale Courts, a New Deal housing project. The place wasn't fancy, but it had 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, a kitchen, and their own bathroom. It was the best home the Presleys had ever had. The housing officer even praised Gladys for keeping everything clean and tidy, which made her very happy. For Elvis, it was a great place to grow up. Memphis was a different world from Tupelo, especially when it came to race. Although it was still segregated, Memphis had a vibrant black community, especially around Beale Street. This exposure to black culture and music had a big impact on Elvis. He started listening to race music on the radio, songs by artists like Big Bill Broonzy and Big Boy Crudup. His parents still preferred country and gospel, but Elvis loved the blues and rhythm and blues. If he hadn't moved to Memphis, his life and music would have been very different. Elvis started at Humes High School, which he thought looked like a prison when he first saw it. He was nervous and stammered a lot, especially with words that started with W. Some kids made fun of his Mississippi accent and called him a teacher's pet. His English class was his favorite, and his teacher said he did well in recitation, but needed to work on his grammar. Despite the challenges, he was remembered as a polite and shy boy. Elvis didn't bring his guitar to school at first, because he was worried about how people would react. His voice was also breaking, which made him nervous. But he loved singing and would play his guitar in the stairwell, where the echo made it sound great. Not everyone appreciated his music, and his dad often reminded him that guitar players didn't make much money. Gladys, however, always encouraged him. With both parents working, the family had more money, but it was still tight. Elvis helped out by mowing lawns and paying the grocery bills. His dad was proud of his work ethic, and his mom always reminded him to keep up with his schoolwork. Sundays were still church days, and the Presleys went to I Assembly of God. Elvis was also interested in gospel groups like the Blackwood Brothers Quartet and the Statesmen. Singing with a group was exciting for him, and it always would be. Elvis spent a lot of time listening to and studying music. He would save up to buy records, mostly by black artists. He learned to play the piano by ear, just like he did with the guitar. He would go to Charlie's record store on Saturdays to play the jukebox and buy records. Getting his driver's license at 15 was a big moment for Elvis. He loved driving and would take his mom out to show her around Memphis. It was a special time for him. In his later teens, Elvis began to change. He started dressing differently, buying bright clothes from stores where black musicians shopped. He grew his hair long and got sideburns, inspired by the movies and wanting to look like a star. Some kids at school thought he looked weird, but it didn't bother him. His friend Red West protected him from bullies, and they became close friends. Elvis's singing never stopped, and he became more confident. He performed at the school minstrel show and sang a Teresa Brewer hit. The audience loved it, and he became more popular. He graduated from high school in 1953, the first in his family to do so. It was a proud moment for him and especially for his mother. Elvis had always felt like an outsider in school. "I'd just sit there in class and be looking out the window," he admitted later. "I had no idea what the teacher was saying. I'd be thinking about Tony Curtis and Marlon Brando and being a star and singing. I was just dreaming all the time." Some of his classmates went on to college, but for Elvis, it wasn't an option. His family couldn't afford it, and he had to help out at home. Since he was 15, he'd been working every summer, taking any job he could get. He was proud to contribute, but deep down, he longed for something more. After graduating, Elvis toyed with the idea of becoming a police officer. The uniform and camaraderie, along with the idea of driving around in a police car, appealed to him, but he soon realized that any job would do. So, the week after graduation, he went to the Tennessee State Employment Office, hoping to find full-time work. One day, Elvis read about the Memphis recording service in a newspaper. It was a place where you could walk in off the street and make a recording to take home. He also heard about Sam Phillips, the owner, who was known for recording blues musicians from Beale Street. Phillips was a white man from Alabama who loved the music that came out of Beale Street. Elvis knew he needed to meet Phillips, but how? By knocking on his door, he decided. The Memphis recording service was a small shop at 706 Union Avenue. Elvis had driven past it many times, hoping to catch a glimpse of Phillips or Rufus Thomas, a disc jockey who had recorded for Sun, but he never saw them. A week after graduation, he found himself walking up and down outside the studio, trying to work up the courage to go inside. Finally, he saw a blonde lady watching him from behind the Venetian blinds. He felt too embarrassed to walk away again. When he finally walked in, the lady smiled, as if she was rewarding him for his bravery. She looked like one of the kind but firm teachers he knew from high school. There were other young men waiting, some with guitars, hoping to be discovered. When it was his turn, he told the secretary he wanted to make a recording for his mother's birthday, even though it was a little lie. The secretary, Marion Kasker, asked him a few questions to put him at ease. "So, what kind of singer are you?" she asked. "I sing all kinds," Elvis replied, not knowing how to answer. "But who do you sound like?" she pressed. "I don't sound like nobody," he said, a line he would remember for years. Marion set up the recording and took him into the studio. Elvis was so nervous his mouth was dry, but he managed to sing My Happiness, and that's when your heartaches begin. He paid for both sides of a 10-inch acetate disc and took it home, playing it over and over until it was nearly worn through. His mother, Gladys, was very proud, and he played it for their neighbors. His father, Vernon, didn't say much, but Elvis thought he was pleased to. The recording session had left Elvis with a sense of purpose, but he still wondered what kind of singer he was. He liked Dean Martin and Bing Crosby, but he also loved Hank Williams and the rhythm and blues bands he listened to every night. There were separate radio stations for pop and country music, and neither fit with the gospel music he loved. Around this time, he started dating a girl named Dixie Locke. They met at church and began going to the movies and listening to music together. Dixie didn't mind that Elvis looked different. They even went to a Black Baptist church to listen to gospel music. Standing in the porch, they watched and listened, and Elvis was moved by the performances. He told Dixie, "If I could sing like some of the soloists, I wouldn't want for nothing else." Elvis auditioned for a gospel quartet called the Songfellows, but they turned him down. He was upset but determined. His first job after school was on an assembly line, but he didn't like it. He then became an apprentice electrician at Crown Electric, which suited his mother. However, he was always thinking about music. He visited Sun Records a few times, asking Marion Kasker if she knew of any singing jobs. She never did, but she was always welcoming. One hot Saturday morning in June 1954, almost a year after he graduated, Marion Kasker called him at work. She asked if he could be at Sun by 3. Elvis was there almost before she hung up. He had barely spoken to Sam Phillips before, but Phillips was a busy man with the energy and drive of 3 people. When they met, Phillips was impressed by Elvis's determination. Phillips, whom Elvis always called Mr. Phillips, was a natural leader, and owning his own record company made him seem larger than life. Elvis felt out of place, but he knew he belonged there. He was ready to make his mark. On that hot Saturday in 1954, Elvis Presley sat in the tiny Sun Records studio, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had just finished a grueling afternoon of singing Without You, a song written by a prison inmate, but nothing seemed to click. Sam Phillips, the studio's owner, had been incredibly patient, but as the hours dragged on, Elvis couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed his big chance. Finally, Phillips called it a day, thanked Elvis, and sent him home. Elvis left dejected, thinking his dream was over, but life had other plans. The following week, tragedy struck when two members of the Blackwood Brothers, a gospel quartet that the Presleys adored, died in a plane crash. Elvis was devastated, questioning why such a thing could happen. He was so upset that he barely noticed when his girlfriend, Dixie, went on vacation without him. His mind was consumed by the loss, and the fear that Dixie might find someone else while she was away. To distract himself, he went to the movies, but his peace was short-lived. His mother, Gladys, found him there and told him that a guitarist named Scotty Moore had called, offering an audition for Elvis. Elvis was nervous but determined. He went to Scotty's home the next afternoon, where he met Bill Black, a bass player. Scotty and Bill listened to Elvis sing, and though they didn't think he was anything special, they agreed that he had potential. The next day, Marion Kasker, Sam Phillips's assistant, called Elvis to come to the studio to work with Scotty and Bill. That night, the three of them gathered in the sticky, airless Sun studio, with Phillips in the control room, ready to capture whatever magic they could create. They started with a few pop ballads, but it quickly became clear that what they were doing wasn't cutting it. Phillips, always the perfectionist, kept encouraging Elvis, but the songs lacked the spark he was looking for. As the night wore on, the tension in the room grew. Elvis was frustrated, and the others were tired. But then, in a moment of pure spontaneity, Elvis began to sing an old blues song he knew by Big Boy Crudup, "That's All Right, Mama." Bill and Scotty, feeling the energy, joined in, and the three of them started jamming. The sound was raw and unpolished, but it was something different, something new. Phillips, hearing the magic through his headphones, called out, "What the hell y'all doing in there?" They explained they were just fooling around, and Phillips, intrigued, asked them to keep going. He wanted them to find the right balance and start from the beginning. Phillips gave them advice, telling Scotty to keep it simple and Elvis to sing with passion. They recorded 6 takes, and Phillips chose the best ones. As they packed up to leave, they all knew they had created something unique. It wasn't black, it wasn't white, and it wasn't pop. It was a fusion of blues and country, a sound that no one had heard before. The next night, they returned to the studio to record a flip side. They tried Blue Moon, but it didn't feel right. After several hours of trying different songs, they finally settled on Blue Moon of Kentucky, a country standard. Phillips wanted it to be different, so they sped it up, giving it a new energy. The job was done, but the real test was yet to come. Sam Phillips played "That's All Right" for Dewey Phillips, a disc jockey on WHBQ who loved it. That night, Dewey played the song repeatedly on his show, and the phones at the station lit up. Listeners were enchanted, and many called in, curious about the singer. Dewey, known for his energetic style, asked Elvis to come to the station for an interview. Elvis was terrified but went anyway. Dewey, in his usual laid-back manner, interviewed Elvis without telling him he was on the air. The interview was a success, and Dewey played "That's All Right" even more times. The next day, Sun Records was flooded with orders for the record. Elvis's life was about to change forever. He had found his voice, and the world was listening. Elvis and the band tried a different approach, picking up the pace and giving the song a new edge. Sam listened, and a smile returned to his face. "Hell, now that's different. That's a pop song now, nearly," he said to Elvis. "Let's just hope Bill Monroe doesn't find out what we've done with his song." Bill laughed, but Bill Monroe didn't like it at all. He complained all over Nashville, calling Elvis's version a ruin of his song. In Memphis, though, the band didn't care. They loved it. "That's All Right" was a blues song with a country touch, thanks to Scotty's guitar, and Blue Moon of Kentucky was a revved-up country classic. Sam cut Elvis an acetate of both tracks before they left the studio that night. It was late when Elvis got home, but Gladys was waiting up for him. She never went to bed until he got back, He couldn't wait to play the record for her. With the echo Sam had added, Elvis's voice sounded clearer, sharper, and more free than ever before. Sitting there with his mother, Elvis felt a sense of wonder. It seemed like he was finally becoming the Elvis Presley he'd been dreaming of for 3 years. The record was pressed and played on every station in Memphis. The rhythm and blues DJ loved That's All Right, while the country DJ went for Blue Moon of Kentucky. The band was hitting both markets, and for Elvis, the biggest thrill was seeing someone buy a copy or play both sides on the jukebox at Charlie's. Within a few days, the record sold 6,000 copies and climbed to number 3 on the local chart. Elvis knew this didn't mean much to the world outside Memphis, but it felt just as sweet as having a worldwide hit. International fame would always be hard for him to grasp, because he wouldn't know the people buying his records. In Memphis, everyone was glad for him except for those who were jealous. Dixie heard Blue Moon of Kentucky on the radio in her father's car as they drove back from vacation in Florida. Elvis had sent her a telegram, telling her what had happened and asking her to hurry home. When she heard his voice on the radio, she understood. She was only 15, but they had talked about marriage. Now, those plans were on hold. Sam's office at Sun was small, so when he needed to discuss things with more than one person, they would meet at Taylor's Cafe next door. One day, Sam showed Elvis, Scotty, and Bill Musicians Union forms and suggested they legally become a band. Scotty would be the manager, getting 10% of the bookings, while Scotty and Bill would each get 25% of the remaining money, leaving Elvis with 50%. Vernon had to countersign the contract for Elvis, who was only 19. Scotty and Bill were experienced musicians, while Elvis hadn't even sung in public yet, but Scotty thought the front man should get more. Elvis didn't care much about the details of contracts and payments, but he knew he'd be ripped off many times in the future. Back then, though, Scotty didn't take a single penny from him. They weren't earning anything yet, and Elvis still had to work at Crown Electric. He would drive around town in his pickup truck and attend rehearsals with Scotty and Bill in a room above the dry cleaners where Scotty worked. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exciting. One lunchtime, Marion took him to meet his first journalist. Elvis was so nervous that Marion answered all the questions for him. The newspaper article made it look like he had said it all. A photographer took his picture that day, and Elvis saw it in the newspaper. He was as thin as a rail, wearing a Western-style jacket and a bow tie with his pimples in full view. He thought he looked terrible. Dixie and Gladys told him he was good-looking, and he wanted to believe them. He decided to make sure he looked better next time. A few weeks later, Sam got them a spot at a concert at the Memphis Overton Park Shell Amphitheater. Slim Whitman, who had a hit with Indian Love Call, was the main act. As beginners, they shouldn't have been on the bill, but there they were. Elvis was nervous when they got his name wrong in the ads, calling him Elvis Presley. As they walked out on stage, Elvis saw his parents and Dixie in the audience. The place looked huge, and they froze for a moment. Then Bill started thumping on his bass, and Elvis joined in on his guitar. They began with That's All Right. At first, Elvis was so focused that he didn't notice the audience. But as the song went on, he heard a lot of shouting and yelling. He was confused. Were they laughing at him? What happened? What happened? He asked Sam after the show. Sam was smiling. I don't know, Elvis, but whatever it was you were doing, do it again. They went back out and sang the songs again. This time the girls went wild. After the show, Scotty explained that most singers stood still by the microphone, but Elvis was moving around, keeping the rhythm with his body. His loose, pleated trousers made it look kind of provocative. To Bill, it looked like something was going on inside his pants. That's what got the girls excited. Elvis had seen preachers and singers move around like that at revival meetings, but he swore the first time he did it on stage was unintentional. After that, he worked at it. He performed with Slim Whitman several times, and the star yodeler always reminded him that he had stolen the show that day in Memphis. All summer, Elvis was either with Dixie or trying out different songs at Scotty's place. Sam arranged regular spots at the Eagle's Nest Club, and a performance at Katz's drugstore on the back of a flatbed truck. It wasn't a segregated performance, so black kids were in the audience too. Elvis was paid $32.50, which was nearly as much as he earned in a week at Crown Electric. Johnny Cash was in the crowd that day, and said seeing Elvis perform pushed him to start his own career. Bookings were coming in clubs, school gymnasiums, and even a free show at a hospital for paralyzed people. It was all small, local stuff, but it was thrilling as the record sales spread to Arkansas, Mississippi, and Texas. When Elvis saw his record in the Mid-South Country chart in Billboard magazine, he was ecstatic. Blue Moon of Kentucky was bigger outside Memphis, but That's All Right was his start, and he would sing it for the rest of his life. If he could have had one time in his life over again, it would probably have been that summer of 1954. The worldwide hit records, TV shows, movies, tours, gold records, money, and fame were all great, but being 19 in love, and having a hit record in his hometown was the best. With a little more money coming in from stage shows, Elvis bought a new guitar, a Martin D18. Scotty helped him choose it. It cost $175 and was the most expensive thing he'd ever owned. He had the shop engrave his name on it. Every day brought something new. He went to Lansky Brothers on Beale Street, where he had always admired the bright colors and styles that black singers bought. Now he felt entitled to be there, mixing with the famous Memphis people who also went there. Rufus Thomas, a regular at Sun, teased Sam about getting Elvis to record his song Tiger Man. Elvis was flattered. Then one day, Sam introduced him to B.B. King. What a summer! By September, they needed a follow-up record. They went back into the studio and settled on Good Rockin' Tonight and I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. They still didn't have a drummer, so Sam asked one of Scotty's band to pad on a guitar case as a makeshift drum. Marion helped again, writing another verse for I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. The publishers in New York didn't object, but wouldn't let her name go on the record or share in the royalties. She just laughed, happy to hear her words on the radio. Elvis was proving to be a prodigy. Still only 19 and with little professional experience, he was using the Sun studio to experiment with different voices and styles. He had spent his teenage years soaking up all sorts of music from his 78 records. Now, with Sam's enthusiasm and Scotty's backing, he was breathing those influences out again, creating something new and exciting. By his second record, his confidence was astonishing. He didn't know it, but he was inventing the modern rock star. Sam got them a booking on the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. They felt they had reached the summit of success. Elvis had never been away from his parents overnight, and they didn't have a suitcase, so Marion lent him one. It's 200 miles from Memphis to Nashville. On the way, Elvis dreamed about the famous Ryman Auditorium. When they arrived, he was disappointed to see the old, run-down theater. He wasn't the only one. When the Opry people saw Elvis, Scotty, and Bill with just one small amp, they asked, "Where's the rest of the band?" "There is nobody else," Scotty explained, "just us." Elvis left his job at Crown Electric in early October 1954, just 3 months after making his first record. His boss, Mr. Tipler, understood and even supported him, becoming one of Elvis's first fans. Mr. and Mrs. Tipler often went to see Elvis perform at the Eagle's Nest, and Mrs. Tipler even sent him to a fancy hair salon to style his iconic hair. Living at home, Elvis still gave his earnings to his father, Vernon, to help support the family. His parents were worried about his decision to pursue music full-time, especially since Vernon's back was troubling him again. Gladys, who had left her job at the hospital, was proud of Elvis's attention but feared the outside world. She was taking pills to stay slim and pretty for her son, and sometimes drank in secret. Elvis pretended not to notice, but he cared deeply for her and reassured her that he would never be ashamed of her. Elvis's success was growing, and so were the challenges. His girlfriend, Dixie, noticed how other girls reacted to him on stage. She didn't complain much, but Elvis could see that it bothered her. He tried to downplay it, but he loved the attention and the energy it gave him. Sometimes, when he was away, he would do more than just flirt, which left him feeling guilty. Scotty and Bill also quit their jobs to focus on music. They joined Elvis on the road, using Scotty's wife's car for their travels. They began performing on the Louisiana Hayride radio show, which helped them gain more recognition. They added new songs to their repertoire, like Chuck Berry's Maybelline and Laverne Baker's Tweedledee Dee. But Sam Phillips encouraged them to be unique and not just cover popular hits. The band started playing more shows and driving longer distances. Elvis bought a 1951 Lincoln and had Elvis Presley Sun Records painted on the sides. They would strap Bill's bass on top and hit the road, performing as often as they could. After shows, Elvis would be full of energy, constantly changing the radio stations and sometimes walking to cool down with one of the guys for safety. Elvis's fame was spreading, and so were the jealousies. One night, a husband attacked him at an army base because his wife had gotten too excited during the show. Scotty, Bill, and DJ always stuck by Elvis's side to protect him. Despite his growing success, Elvis's earnings were inconsistent. He sent money home to help his parents pay the bills, and they saved the money orders in a box. He was supporting his family, even though he was only 19. While he was away, Dixie would visit Gladys, and they would talk about Elvis. When Elvis called home, he always wanted to know if Dixie had been there and what she said. They would often argue when he was in town, but make up before he had to leave again. Elvis's journey was just beginning, but it was clear that he was something special. His talent, his energy, and his love for his family were the driving forces behind his success. As he continued to perform and travel, the ripples in the pond kept getting bigger, and so did Elvis's impact on the world of music.